The moving truck hadn't even pulled out of my driveway when the first knock came. Not the friendly kind, either. The sort of pounding you hear when someone wants to alert the entire neighborhood that you've already failed some invisible test. I was still standing in a living room full of half-crushed cardboard boxes, holding a coffee mug I hadn't even unpacked properly, when I opened the door to meet 3 strangers lined up on my porch like they were staging an intervention. The tall one in the middle pointed a manicured finger at me as if I'd just stolen his car, and announced, without a hello, that my purchase of the house included obligations I clearly did not understand. For a second, I thought they might be welcoming me. People sometimes confuse sternness for friendliness, right? But then the woman on the left started waving a stack of stapled papers at me like an angry fan. She said, "This lake is not yours. The docks belong to the community. You cannot just move in and assume you have control." I blinked at her. The words had weight, like she'd rehearsed them. Meanwhile, the third neighbor, a guy with a sunburned forehead and mirrored sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast, crossed his arms and smirked, clearly waiting for me to apologize for existing. I had been in this house for less than 2 hours. 2 hours. My groceries were still sweating in the trunk of my car, and already I was apparently public enemy number 1. The absurdity almost made me laugh, but I managed to keep my face neutral. Calmness is a weapon. "Interesting introduction," I said. "I assume this is the part where you explain what the hell you're talking about." That was all the permission they needed. The finger pointer introduced himself as Leonard, self-described chair of the Lake Preservation Committee. He said the house I'd bought used to belong to a cooperative family who understood the rules. Translation: the previous owners were pushovers. Leonard went on about how the docks that extended from my backyard weren't really mine, even though the deed and survey I signed said otherwise. He argued they were community assets that I was merely hosting. The woman with the papers, her name was Brenda, kept cutting in with citations from bylaws I had never agreed to, and Mr. Sunglasses chimed in with occasional grunts about how we've always done it this way. Their performance had a rhythm, like a choir of entitlement. Every time I opened my mouth, one of them overlapped me, raising the volume just enough to push me out. It wasn't a conversation. It was a hostile takeover staged on my welcome mat. The thing is, I had done my homework before buying. I knew there was no HOA here, no binding covenants, just a patchwork of old volunteer committees that liked to pretend they had authority. The previous owners told me the committees only mattered if you let them. Still, here they were, acting like they owned the lake itself. I let them rattle on for a few minutes, sipping the cold coffee from my chipped mug, until Leonard demanded to know when I'd be signing the transfer of dock rights. He phrased it like a foregone conclusion. I finally set my mug down on the railing, leaned against the door frame, and smiled the kind of smile that never reaches your eyes. "Let me save us all some time," I said. "The lakefront is on my deed. The docks are on my deed. I paid for it. You didn't. So unless you're planning on sending me rent money for using them, I think we're done." For a beat, silence. Then Brenda gasped as if I'd just confessed to poisoning the water supply. Leonard's jaw clenched. Sunglasses muttered something about me being one of those. I didn't ask what those meant because I already knew. Independent, unimpressed, unwilling to fold. That was when Brenda tried the nuclear option. She jabbed the papers toward me and said, "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to restrict your access to the lake entirely. You won't be welcome at the boat launches, the fishing tournaments, any of it." I couldn't help it, I laughed. Out loud. The sound startled even me. "You're going to ban me from the lake I literally own a chunk of? Good luck with that." The laugh broke their rhythm. Leonard stuttered something about unity. Sunglasses took off his shades, eyes darting like he was calculating whether to escalate or retreat. Brenda sputtered, flipping through her pages as if the next line might magically contain a law that trumped property deeds. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a one-time skirmish. These people weren't bluffing for fun. They truly believed they had power, and nothing in my calm refusal was going to convince them otherwise. They would keep coming back, finding new angles, escalating every time. And I would have to decide just how far I was willing to play this game. When they finally left, it wasn't because I won the argument. It was because Leonard muttered, "We'll revisit this soon," like a villain in a cheap soap opera. They marched off my porch, leaving me in the doorway with cold coffee and the distinct feeling I had just been served the opening salvo of a war I never asked for. I shut the door, leaned my forehead against it, and whispered to myself, "Welcome home." The next morning, I woke up to hammering. Not inside my house, outside, near the waterline. At first, I thought it was some contractor working on neighbor's deck. But when I stepped out onto my porch, barefoot and still half asleep, I saw the truth. Leonard and two other men I didn't recognize were standing on my dock, attaching a bright orange chain across the entrance, as if they were locking down a crime scene. A sign dangled from the chain with the words "Community Access Only" written in bold black paint. For a second, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. Because who does that? Who wakes up at dawn to blockade someone else's property? I shouted down at them, and Leonard had the gall to wave cheerfully, like he was doing me a favor. He yelled back, "Temporary measure until you sign the agreement." His voice carried across the water, smug and casual. I jogged down the hill to the dock, heart pounding, but I kept my tone cool. Rage never works on people like Leonard. It just fuels them. "You realize you're trespassing, right?" I said, folding my arms. "This is my dock. You're committing vandalism on my property." One of his sidekicks, a wiry guy in overalls, muttered that they were protecting community interests. The other one avoided eye contact completely, like he knew this was insane but didn't want to lose standing with Leonard. The whole setup reeked of high school politics. One domineering kid and two lackeys who hoped sticking close would keep them safe. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." That finally got Leonard's smile to crack. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Now, let's not be dramatic. We're neighbors. We don't need the law involved. This is just a misunderstanding." I didn't bother answering. The dispatcher picked up on the second ring. I calmly explained that 3 men were trespassing on my dock, chaining it off. I gave my address, and the dispatcher said a deputy would be out shortly. When I hung up, Leonard's face was a mix of fury and disbelief, like I'd broken some unspoken rule of his game by calling actual authority. The deputy arrived 20 minutes later, long enough for Leonard to fume and whisper threats about social consequences and isolation. When the cruiser pulled into my driveway, Leonard immediately straightened his posture and greeted the deputy like they were old pals. He tried to spin it as a neighborly disagreement. But the chain was right there, cutting off access to my dock like a neon billboard screaming trespass. The deputy asked to see my deed. I had it ready, tucked in a folder by the front door, because I already knew how these people operated. After one glance, the deputy turned to Leonard and said, "He owns it. You're trespassing. Take the chain down." Leonard sputtered about traditions, about community practices, about how the docks had always been shared. The deputy wasn't buying it. He repeated the order, firmer this time. Overalls unhooked the chain reluctantly, muttering curses under his breath. The third guy slunk away without a word. I half expected Leonard to apologize. Instead, he leaned in close to me as the deputy walked back to his cruiser. His voice was quiet, sharp. "You think this ends with a chain? You've made a mistake. Around here, people who don't cooperate find themselves very alone." He turned and left before I could respond. The chain was gone, but the threat lingered like smoke. For the rest of that day, I noticed strange things. A pickup truck parked at the edge of my driveway for half an hour before rolling off when I came outside. My mailbox, brand new from the move, was dented by evening. At the grocery store, a woman I'd never met muttered selfish under her breath when I passed. Word travels fast in small communities, and Leonard clearly had a network. I stayed calm. That's the only strategy that works against people who thrive on drama. But inside, I was already running calculations. Leonard wasn't just entitled, he was organized. He had followers, and if this was the kind of escalation he pulled in the first week, I needed to brace for worse. Sure enough, 2 days later, the next twist arrived. It started with a letter taped to my front door. No envelope, no stamp, hand-delivered. The letterhead said Lake Preservation Committee, though the paper was just standard printer stock. The letter informed me that my household was now being fined $500 for unauthorized private use of community property. It warned that non-payment could result in further restrictions and penalties. I laughed when I read it. but not because it was funny, because it was audacious. They had no legal standing, no authority to issue fines. It was pure theater, but the kind of theater that can confuse people, scare them into compliance. I imagine the previous owners probably paid up, not wanting to deal with confrontation. I wasn't them. That night, I drafted my own letter. Short, professional, to the point. I reminded them there was no HOA, no legal basis for fines, and that further harassment would be documented and forwarded to county authorities. I signed it with my full name, photocopied it, and mailed a copy to every committee member I could identify. When the letters went out, I expected silence. What I got instead was Leonard showing up at my door again, this time with Brenda in tow, faces red, voices raised. Brenda accused me of spreading lies. Leonard warned me that public shaming was my future if I kept resisting. That was when I realized something deeper. This wasn't about docks or property lines. It was about control. Leonard thrived on being the kingpin of this lake, the one everyone tiptoed around. My refusal wasn't just defiance. It was a threat to his whole identity. And men like him don't back down. They double down. As I closed the door on their shouting, I felt a strange mix of dread and excitement. The conflict was spiraling beyond property disputes. The war Leonard promised was already unfolding, and I had no intention of losing. 3 weeks after the chain incident, I thought things had cooled. The lake was quiet, neighbors kept their distance, and even Leonard hadn't darkened my porch again. I started to wonder if my letter had worked better than I'd expected. That illusion shattered one Saturday morning when I woke to the sound of engines idling outside. I looked out the window and counted 5 pickup trucks lined along my driveway. Men and women milled around, unloading coolers, fishing rods, even folding chairs. And every single one of them marched straight down the hill to my dock like it was a public park. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment, then threw on jeans and headed out. By the time I reached the water, there were at least 20 people setting up camp on my shoreline. Kids were splashing in the shallows, adults cracked open beers, and 2 guys were already stringing up fishing lines off my dock. It looked less like a neighborly get-together and more like an occupation. Leonard, naturally, stood at the center, directing traffic with the smugness of a man unveiling his masterpiece. "Morning, neighbor," he called out when he spotted me. "We're hosting the monthly community fishing day. Perfect weather for it. I figured you wouldn't mind contributing your space." I stared at him, then at the crowd spreading across my yard like ants. My porch furniture had been dragged down without asking. Someone even parked a portable grill next to my boat lift. It was trespass multiplied by 20, wrapped in the thin excuse of tradition. "You're out of your mind," I said. "This isn't a park. It's private property. Get everyone off my dock." Leonard didn't even flinch. He just gestured around with theatrical flourish. "You see? Everyone enjoys this space. It belongs to the community in spirit, if not in deed. Don't be the one to ruin a tradition that predates you." His words weren't meant for me. They were for the crowd. I could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes turning toward me, silently daring me to play the villain. That was Leonard's move. Not confrontation, but conscription. He turned neighbors into witnesses, forcing me to either back down or look like a heartless outsider. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "You're all trespassing. I'll give you 10 minutes to leave peacefully before I call the sheriff again. This time I'll ask for charges." Murmurs rippled through the group. Some people looked uneasy. A couple muttered that they hadn't realized I hadn't given permission. But Leonard raised his voice, louder than mine, drowning out doubt. "Listen to him threaten us. First he bans us. Now he wants to call the cops on families enjoying the lake. This is what selfishness looks like." The man knew how to spin a crowd. A few nodded in agreement. One woman shot me a dirty look as she pulled her child closer. I didn't argue further. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed. I made the report as calmly as before, but my pulse thundered in my ears. Leonard's smile faltered when he realized I wasn't bluffing. Still, he didn't call off the event. The deputies showed up half an hour later, 2 this time. They walked down to the water, took one look at the coolers and lawn chairs scattered across my yard, and immediately ordered people to pack up. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, muttering about how unnecessary it all was, but Leonard kept pushing. He argued about established customs and historic rights. The deputies didn't entertain it. They warned him point blank. One more stunt, and they'd arrest him for criminal trespass. Everyone cleared out, but not before Leonard delivered his parting shot. He leaned close enough that only I could hear. "You may have the law, but I have the people. Let's see how long you last when no one around here will so much as sell you gas." It sounded dramatic, but I didn't underestimate him. Leonard wasn't threatening violence. He was threatening exile. And in a small lakeside community where everyone knows everyone, social exile can cut deeper than fines or fences. The fallout began immediately. At the gas station that week, the clerk pretended not to see me. At the hardware store, an employee told me they were out of stock on a part one knew was on the shelf behind him. At the diner, conversations hushed the moment I walked in. It wasn't coincidence. Leonard had spread his narrative, and the community had chosen sides. I wasn't crushed by loneliness. I'm not built that way. But the practical inconveniences piled up. Supplies became harder to get. Deliveries suddenly got delayed. A neighbor who had promised to help me fix the gutter canceled without explanation. It was petty but effective. Still, I refused to cave. If Leonard won a long game, I could play it better. I started driving into the next county for supplies, paying extra for delivery, keeping records of every incident. I documented everything: photos, dates, times, receipts. That's when the second twist landed. Late one night, as I walked down to check the dock lights, I noticed something strange. My boat cover was slashed. Not once, not twice, dozens of cuts like someone had gone at it with a knife. Inside, the seats were ripped, stuffing spilling out like open wounds. Whoever did it wanted me to know this wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. I stood there in the moonlight, staring at the damage, feeling the anger coil tight in my chest. Calling the sheriff again was an option, but this wasn't about punishment anymore. Leonard wasn't going to stop. He'd keep escalating until he either broke me or I found a way to turn the tables. As I locked the boat shed that night, I realized something important. Leonard's power came from perception. He controlled the story, casting himself as protector and me as outsider. But stories can be rewritten, and I was about to start writing mine. 2 days after I discovered the boat shredded, a deputy finally came out to take photos. He shook his head, muttered something about kids, and promised to file a report. It was useless. There'd be no follow-up, no investigation, not when half the town thought I was the villain in Leonard's morality play. The cops weren't on his payroll, but they weren't eager to dive into the mess either. That night, I sat on the porch with a notebook, sketching out options. I wasn't going to swing fists or shout louder than Leonard. That's what he expected. Instead, I decided to hit him where it hurt, his reputation. The opportunity came quicker than I could have planned. A week later, flyers appeared around town advertising a lakefront unity festival. Food, music, games, all proceeds going to preserve the community docks. My dock was pictured in the center of the flyer, front and center, as if it were public space. Leonard had organized it. He was going to turn my property into the backdrop for his victory parade. I knew trying to block the event outright would backfire. He'd spin it as me attacking a wholesome tradition. So instead, I played along. I even showed up. The day of the festival, my yard was packed. Tents went up without permission. Kids ran screaming through my garden, and a local band set up on a makeshift stage. Leonard strutted around in a branded polo shirt, greeting people like a mayor on election day. He spotted me at the edge of the crowd and raised his beer in mock salute. I didn't confront him. I mingled. I chatted. I let people talk. When asked how I felt about the event, I answered calmly, "Oh, it's nice." Though funny thing, the organizers never asked permission to use my property. But I suppose Leonard has a vision. I smiled, said it lightly, and moved on. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I just planted seeds. Throughout the day, I noticed little cracks. One guy grumbled about paying $10 for a hamburger. A woman muttered that Leonard hadn't delivered the t-shirts he promised for volunteers. A fisherman whispered that the raffle prizes looked suspiciously like hand-me-downs. Everyone brushed it off because Leonard projected confidence. But confidence is fragile. By evening, the cracks split wide open. The band demanded payment Leonard hadn't secured. The food vendor realized Leonard had promised exposure instead of cash. Parents complained about the bounce house collapsing. The raffle winner stormed off when her grand prize kayak turned out to be a used paddleboard with duct tape on the seams. I stood by my porch, arms crossed, watching the chaos unravel. Leonard scrambled from group to group, trying to patch holes in his sinking ship. But the more he explained, the worse it got. The truth spread faster than his excuses. He'd pocketed most of the money, assuming no one would question him. That was when I made my move. I climbed onto the stage after the band packed up in frustration. People were gathered, buzzing with anger. I raised my voice just enough to carry. Since my dock was the centerpiece of today's event, I'd like to make something clear. Leonard never asked me. He never paid me. And judging by what I've heard from a few of you, he didn't exactly treat anyone here honestly either. If you're upset, don't take it out on each other. Ask Leonard where the money went. The silence that followed was electric. Dozens of heads turned toward him. He opened his mouth, but this time no words came. For the first time since I'd moved in, Leonard didn't look powerful. He looked cornered. The crowd didn't riot, but the atmosphere shifted. People packed up quickly, muttering darkly, shooting him glances filled with suspicion instead of loyalty. By sunset, the yard was empty except for trash and Leonard himself, standing by the dock with a face twisted in rage. "You smug bastard," he hissed at me once we were alone. "You think embarrassing me will make them side with you? They'll hate you even more now. They'll blame you for ruining it." "Maybe," I said, shrugging. "Or maybe they'll start asking questions you can't answer." He stepped close, low voice shaking with fury. "You don't understand. This lake is mine. I built everything here. You can't just waltz in and take it from me." That was the moment the truth clicked. It wasn't about me. It wasn't even about the docks. Leonard needed the lake to be his stage. His entire identity was built on being the man everyone deferred to. My refusal wasn't just defiance, it was exposure. I pulled the curtain back, and he couldn't stand it. When he finally stormed off, I knew the war wasn't over. If anything, it was about to escalate. Leonard wouldn't forgive humiliation. He'd double down, sharper and nastier than before. And I had to be ready, because the next move wouldn't just be public theater. It would be personal. That night, as I cleared beer cans off my lawn, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Leonard had numbers, but I had patience. He thrived in the short term, on loudness and intimidation. I thrived in silence, in planning, in letting people reveal themselves. And Leonard had just revealed his cracks. I didn't know what his next move would be, but I knew it would be the biggest yet. I thought Leonard would stew after the festival disaster. Maybe retreat, lick his wounds, rebuild his little empire. But retreat wasn't in his vocabulary. He came back swinging. Only this time it wasn't bluster or crowd theatrics. It was paperwork. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside was a complaint filed with zoning enforcement. According to Leonard's submission, my dock violated community shoreline easements and posed an environmental hazard. He demanded immediate removal pending investigation. It was laughable. My dock had stood there for 30 years without issue, but the county didn't laugh. They scheduled a hearing. It was the perfect move. Legal theater. Leonard couldn't beat me with chains, fines, or public shaming, so he weaponized bureaucracy. I had 2 weeks to prepare. The hearing was held in a drab room at the county office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I sat at one table with my folder of deeds, surveys, and photos. Leonard strutted in with Brenda at his side, and a binder so thick it looked like he'd robbed a Staples. He didn't glance at me. He was too busy shaking hands with anyone in a county badge. When the board called us forward, Leonard unleashed a rehearsed monologue about stewardship, tradition, and my alleged disregard for the environment. He painted himself as guardian of the lake, me as the reckless newcomer threatening its future. He presented photos of erosion, which were really just normal shoreline changes. He claimed community easements dating back decades, conveniently ignoring that none of them were ever recorded. It was my turn. I stayed calm, steady. I produced the deed with the dock clearly within my property lines. I cited the absence of any HOA or binding easements. I provided letters from the surveyor and even a retired county planner who confirmed the dock was compliant. I didn't rant. I didn't sneer. I just presented facts like puzzle pieces sliding into place. When the board recessed to deliberate, Leonard finally looked at me. His eyes burned, but beneath the fury was fear. He knew he'd overreached. The verdict came 30 minutes later. Complaint dismissed. Dock lawful. Case closed. Brenda gasped. Leonard clenched his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He stormed out without a word, binder under his arm, Brenda trailing after him like a shadow. I should have felt victorious, but victory wasn't the end. Not with Leonard. That night, around midnight, I woke to the glow of flames flickering outside. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought the dock itself was burning. I bolted outside barefoot, but it wasn't the dock. It was a pile of brush Leonard had dumped at the edge of my property and set alight. The fire licked high, dangerously close to the trees. I called 911. The fire department arrived fast enough to contain it, but the message was clear. Leonard had dropped the mask. This wasn't theater anymore. It was sabotage. The sheriff's deputies came too. I handed them the remnants of the gasoline I found nearby. I didn't accuse Leonard outright. I didn't need to. They knew. Everyone knew. And this time, the deputies didn't shrug. They promised an investigation. The next morning, word spread across the community like wildfire. People whispered not about me, but about Leonard, about how far he'd gone, about the danger he'd created. Parents muttered about kids near the fire. Homeowners fretted about insurance. Fishermen worried about being dragged into lawsuits. For the first time, Leonard's story didn't stick. 3 days later, deputies showed up at his house. They walked him out in handcuffs. Arson. Reckless endangerment. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no scene. Just a man stripped of his power as quietly as he once claimed it. The shock waves were immediate. The committees folded without their figurehead. Neighbors who once glared at me now offered awkward nods, some even apologies. One woman left cookies on my porch, a clumsy peace offering. I didn't hold grudges, but I also didn't forget. People follow power, not principle, and they had followed Leonard until the flames threatened their own homes. Life grew quieter after that. The dock stayed mine. The lake stayed calm. Leonard fought his charges in court, but he lost. Last I heard, he sold his house to cover legal fees and moved 2 counties over. One evening months later, I sat on the dock with a glass of bourbon, watching the sun set across water, finally free of drama. The boards creaked under me, solid and steady. For the first time since I moved in, the lake felt like mine, not because I owned it on paper, but because I'd survived the gauntlet Leonard built around it. Funny thing is, I never wanted a war. I just want a place to fish, to relax, to breathe. But sometimes peace isn't handed to you. Sometimes you have to fight for it, not with fists or fire, but with patience, logic, and the occasional perfectly timed word. As the last light slipped behind the trees, I raised my glass in a silent toast. Not to Leonard, not to the neighbors, to the dock, to the absurd, exhausting battle that had tried to strip it from me and failed. Welcome home, indeed.